Aloha, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a few items of housekeeping as we start to go into things. Just to let you know that we are going to be recording today. So this is going to be available on our Facebook Live. We're also going to have this available as recording that you can share out if you missed a portion or you want to share with someone who wasn't able to make it today on our YouTube page, and that's at MHA of Hawaii. But you'll also be getting that link as well as the PDF slides to this presentation in an email post the presentation because we want to make sure everyone has those pieces for them. We do have some staff with us today. Thank you to Danielle Bergen and Brantella Sayan, who will be monitoring both our Facebook Live chat and our Zoom chat today. So we're going to go ahead and get started, but first I'd just like to do a little bit of some brief introductions. My name is Dr. Mestisa. Most people call me Dr. G. I am the program director here at Mental Health America Hawaii, and I'm joined by our amazing intern today, Janice Burnside. Janice, if you'll do just a brief introduction of yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for attending. As you know, my name is Janice Burnside. I am a senior at UH Manoa, majoring in public health, and Mental Health America of Hawaii has graciously accepted me as an intern this summer.
We're very excited to have Janice. She's an amazing presenter. We're going to go and get started today on talking a little bit about self-care for direct service providers. And this would be anyone who is providing care, working in the mental health field, and some of it will be quite applicable to those who are doing therapeutic services. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. Excellent. So we didn't realize that this is going to be kind of a general 101 because there's so much information to talk about and just looking at anxiety and stress for direct service providers. So if there's information that comes up and you're interested in learning just a little bit more, know that we'll be mentioning at the end of the presentation other trainings that are coming up that will go in depth to some of those topics. You'll see us talking a little bit about distress tolerance skills, coping skills, and even stopping briefly to talk about grief. We are introducing a brand new grief presentation that will be available in July, so you can go to our website or go to our Facebook page to learn about the dates for that and the times for that. But just to know that there are other presentations that take pieces of this one and go very deep into those topics. But for this presentation specifically, it's going to be a little bit more of a 101. So I'm going to go ahead and hand that off to you, Janice.
All right, let's get started. So again, thank you so much for attending today. This is addressing anxiety and stress for direct service providers. You can go to them. Thank you. So today we will be going over the negative impacts of COVID-19, this pandemic, and its implications on mental health. We'll also be discussing the factors that have increased anxiety and stress, as well as assessing for providers self-care. We'll also be identifying self-care and coping skills to address anxiety, but as Dr. G mentioned, this is more of a 101, so if you'd like some more details into that, we do have other webinars to attend for those. And then lastly, we'll be reviewing some resources, crisis resources that are available in our community. So COVID-19 has resulted in an increase in reports of anxiety and depressive symptoms. I don't think this is new news for any of us, but it has resulted in an increase as well in experience of the severity of symptoms, especially for those with pre-existing mental health issues. And the statistics are showing that 3.7% of residents here in Hawaii do live with a serious mental health condition, and 68.2% did not receive treatment for this. And so every other day, someone in Hawaii dies by suicide.
So looking at some of those statistics, this is from about 2019, and this is from our Hawaii State Department of Health, our EMS and Injury Prevention Control Branch. And the thing to take away from here is to look at the #1 cause for deaths and fatal injuries, and that is for age 15 to 44, it's suicide, and then for 45 to 74, it's the second leading cause. And you'll see it as third for 75 and older. So it just shows the why we continue to talk about resiliency and coping skills and why we really focus on building those protective factors. I see a raised hand. Did anyone have any questions they wanted to pop into the chat? Feel free to do so as we move along, because I know sometimes if I hold mine, then I forget mine. We'll wait for that to come in. But some of the other things that I really want to talk about is things that can impact our mental health. And the reason I really like this chart is from the World Health Organization, is because it talks about different time periods. It goes systemic up the side, and then it goes across settings. So let's just take one that most of us fall into, which would be looking at adulthood. That's that red on the bottom. And we're just going to go from the top on work and go down every systemic level down to the adulthood range. And the other things that can impact mental health would be things like social inequality, adverse media influences, job insecurities, unemployment, harmful use of alcohol, and physical ill health. And I think that with what we've been learning more and more about how COVID and the quarantine impacted us is that many people, unfortunately, were having these kinds of impacts on their mental health. And that's why we really focus on those protective factors. So there's a question in the chat about the kind of like a means for people who are, poisoning themselves. Why is there a top reason? So one of the things to kind of keep in mind is when you look at us specifically statewide, there are difference in terms of the means in which people die by suicide than it would be nationally. So nationally, when we look at protective factors, when we look at doing kind of like these interventions, some of the things they talk about is like building things like physical barriers, which aren't really things that we're looking at here in the state. But one of the things that is really specific to us is people typically using poisoning as a means, which is why we really, want to make sure that people have that poison control number, that they're aware of the fact that that is. So thank you so much for bringing it up, that it is one of the high mean ways that people do attempt. And so making sure that people are aware of that. Why they choose to use that, I think it comes down to a lot of different reasons as to why things are different from state to state and why we are different in terms of us to national. And I think it just comes down to like availability and the different like regulations on different kinds of things. So we also want to talk a little bit about vulnerable populations, people who have been impacted. And it's not to say that we haven't all been impacted, but there are specific populations a little bit more vulnerable for a lot of different reasons. And some of those include people who were high risk or did contract COVID-19. We're seeing very specific things post healing from COVID-19 in terms of it impacting people's mental health, with things including sleep issues, increased anxiety, and increased depression 6 months after healing from COVID. We know that people with pre-existing medical, psychiatric, or substance use challenges also are more vulnerable. Our healthcare providers, our frontline workers, because they continue to work during that time. Certain age groups have really specific kind of concerns and issues. So keikis and teens who are being impacted because of school and that kind of peer-to-peer like learning that is been limited. Our kapunas because of isolation. Our caregivers because they have those multiple roles and continue to try to adjust and transition as things change for them. Also, people who had an employment status change, socially isolated and marginalized individuals, and of course, those with less access to resources and care, those being houseless. We also know that people are being impacted at work. And so this is some of what we really wanted to talk about. When I talk to people that are, my cohort members who are out working in mental health, most of them are psychiatrists, psychologists, licensed clinical social workers, they run the gamut in behavioral health. And they started talking to me about, am I being effective as a direct service provider? I'm starting to feel run down and like I'm having a hard time with my own self-care. What are the things I should be looking at? Which is really what precipitated this training today. So things that can be a stressor for you when you're at work, or if you're having clients, you're having some challenges in progressing through their treatment, who are having like multiple crises as they move through their care, and who might be exhibiting some signs of aggression. You might have some concerns for yourself because you're tending to focus on others, but at the same time neglecting yourself. Maybe the nature of your job is that you've been on call and you're having really long hours because of all the different things that are happening. There could be a change in leadership, staff cutbacks, and even not feeling very supported by leadership or just feeling like it's just a little bit more challenging right now. You could be experiencing more negative feedback, not feeling really appreciated, having a hard time meeting your deadlines, feeling that really increased pressure. I heard a lot of people saying things like, even though I'm working from home, it's almost like there's an expectation that my productivity would be higher to prove that I'm doing things. And so that can feel really stressful. They might even have a hard time finishing projects. There's also for some people feelings of like being professionally isolated, like not really having a support system to talk to other people who you can kind of get that mentorship from or even do case consultation with. Or you can also be experiencing the fact that your boundaries feel a little bit permeable. And what that means is the boundary between me and you, they kind of move like this. And I think the reason that can happen a little bit more right now is this is one of the few times, historically speaking, that people who are giving care are in the same type of concern as the people receiving care. And so you might feel those boundaries get a little bit permeable because when people are talking about how their life has been impacted, the challenges that they're experiencing, you might be saying, that's me too. And so that's really hard to keep those boundaries a little bit more firm. There can also be things happening personally, which is things happening with family. Maybe you're, a caregiver, and so you're having to balance those multiple roles and figuring out how to make very quick transitions in terms of the people that you're caregiving for and making sure they're getting care as you move back from work or moving back to home. Maybe there have been issues in terms of finances or your own physical and mental health as you provide care. It definitely can have that feeling of, depleting yourself, and we need to make sure that you're focusing on that bank account for yourself. There could be changes in relationship status or even just major transitions. We know what those big stressors are. Maybe you had to move, or maybe there was a job transition, but all those things that we think of as just common but stressful transitions added on top of what was already happening could definitely make someone feel really anxious and stressed. When I was talking to people and they were saying, you know, it's interesting. They're saying, I don't know if I should be talking about this. I don't even know how I feel as a direct service provider actually saying this, but they're saying, like, I don't feel like I'm as empathetic as I used to be. I don't know if I'm as effective as a service provider as I used to be. And so I started kind of digging around to see, like, is there a quick assessment to look at that just allows for either like a conversational point or allows us just to do that screener and say, like, am I not? And so this one I like, it's from 2002. There may be some that are a little bit more updated, but I like it because it does have you kind of think about where you are in that process. So it asks you questions like, do you appear competent, professional, warm, caring, and accepting? Are you accessing that like regular case consultation and being really mindful of that confidentiality? Are you using your own self-talk to soothe yourself at the end of the day? We talk about that all the time with our clients, like positive self-talks, and so making sure you're using that as well. And I think this one's a little bit more challenging in making sure you have that balance between work and family and play, and that you're accessing your support system if you need it, and that when you're doing your leisure activities, that they still feel relaxing. When you're working with your clients, do you feel renewed? Like sometimes, when you have like a really like an interesting client, or they're really funny, or they're talking about something that just, you're learning at the same time they're learning, are you still able to feel renewed by that, feel that interest in that work that you're doing? Do you find those challenges that they're going through interesting? Because all that speaks to like engagement. Are you being objective when you're thinking about their challenges? And are you maintaining, again, those good boundaries? And are you accessing psychotherapy for yourself? Because there's some really great people in the community who do provide therapy for therapists specifically, because it is a bit different, right? You want to have that master level therapist for yourself. And are you still using and experiencing humor in your practice? And are you still maintaining those legal and ethical standards? So I like this as just like a brief overview of just doing a little check-in with yourself, but also like making sure to share this with your coworkers to say, like, here's a check-in just to see where you fall. I know we're all pretty familiar with the symptoms of anxiety, but just to review them a little bit, we know that the psychological symptoms will have things like excessive worry, agitation, and restlessness, and that you can be impacted by your attention and concentration. Statistically speaking, we know about 30 minutes right now of sleep is just being disrupted by people nationally. And then, of course, there's the avoidance of other stressors because we're feeling so overwhelmed. And to highlight kind of those physiological symptoms, because I do hear people talking about them a little bit more now, is people experiencing things like rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, chest pains, muscle tensions, and dizziness. And of course, the one that we don't talk about enough, which is stomach pains, gastrointestinal issues, because that's your nervous system, of course, kicking in and having those physical manifestations. But also culturally, there are some people who typically manifest their anxiety more in a physical nature than a psychological nature. So just being really mindful if that's you to check in on yourself and do that good self-care. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is this idea that we're all going through it, right? As a direct service provider, you are also part of the community. So you're working on your own individual resiliency, but you're also looking at the community resiliency because that's where your clients are and that's where you're practicing. There's a lot of different things that can make communities more resilient. And some of that's just the idea of whether or not we as a community can adapt to the needs and how quickly we can adapt to it, whether or not we have enough capital, and that capital could be anything from human, community, economic, or political. And some examples of that would be human capital would be how resilient each individual person is, which is why we do these trainings. And some of those things can be, for example, political, which is how much trust do you have in your leadership to be able to support the changes that need to be made to meet these new challenges. And you can see how this is just multiple levels of people needing to find those resources, share them, and then build that sense of connectivity.
And from there, we have individual resiliency. And so, absolutely, we want to learn, use, and share these coping skills. We'll be getting into that a little bit more, as well as focusing on self care. We plan ahead. What we mean by plan ahead is when we know that there are some big projects or events coming up, and maybe sometimes they may seem overwhelming, it can really help to anticipate that, but then, of course, break them down into smaller, more manageable pieces. Of course, we want to take care of our physical needs. We want to engage in regular exercise, maybe get out into nature while doing that. We want to nourish our bodies. We want to eat healthy, lots of fruits and vegetables, and take breaks as needed. This one is really important, along with connecting to our social support system, whether that's our friends or our family, or even our own professional mental health care providers. And then lastly, of course, remember that you're doing your best and that is good enough. I love this image. As you can see here, it says you cannot pour from an empty cup. And just like Dr. G has briefly mentioned before, when we invest like in our bank accounts, we also want to invest in ourselves. And so we want to practice self-care when we can to sort of put it into the bank so that we can draw on it when we need it. And of course, we can't do that if it's empty. So we really certainly want to invest in ourselves so that we can pour from a full cup. And so self-care, some ways that we can practice self-care are to validate our emotions. There are times where we may run through the whole gamut of emotions. We may be feeling extremely stressed or depressed or anxious, and then the next moment we may be feeling okay. And that is perfectly normal. Of course, we want to validate that that is how we feel, and that's okay. What's also important is to stay connected. So as mentioned earlier, we want to take inventory of our social support systems and then stay connected with them as well. Human beings are social animals and we do need to stay connected. In addition to that, or on the flip side, we don't want to overcheck. And by overcheck, this could mean, for example, the news. We've had some pretty challenging times in the last year and a half. And so really taking stock of checking media and making sure that we're not overwhelming ourselves with that. We also want to focus on the helpers. All of you as direct service providers, of course, we want to help each other as well. And the essential workers, of course, the essential workers that have just been really feeling it. And then in addition to that, people that are vulnerable in our circle, we want to make sure that they're okay, that they feel supported. And then lastly, part of self-care could be the creature comfort. So I personally enjoy lavender oil and keeping my space comfy and with dim lighting, all of that is really great self-care. In addition to that, we want to follow a schedule. So I know personally for me, as a UH student, I was very used to going in person, and all of a sudden everything was online and I didn't have to wake up as early to commute. But then I also noticed that I was still wearing my pajamas all day, every day. And so we want to follow a schedule. We want to go to bed at around the same time, wake up at around the same time, keep that schedule and that consistency in our lives. We also want to schedule in self-care. So again, we want to invest in ourselves. When we can practice that, we want to do it a few times a day and fill that cup so that we can really draw on it when we need it. And then we also want to use social media responsibly. I'm sure all of us have seen over social media. I know personally for me, I was getting a little bit stressed out, and it's really important for me. And I suggest if you haven't tried it, to take a break sometimes from social media. It can be quite stressful sometimes. And then also we want to be aware of what resources are available to us. And which we will get later into this presentation. We'll have a list of resources that might interest you. We also want to invest in ourselves, of course, again, putting in that investment a little bit into our bank so that we can use it when we need it. And I love this last one, spending time in nature. I know for me, when I feel really overwhelmed and I'm just over it sometimes, I'll just get outside and I'll see the palm trees or the mountains or the sunset. And I just feel this sense of well-being and calmness and that everything's okay and recharged as well. And so another important factor is to recognize these warning signs. And so we've listed here mood dysregulation. If you find that you or someone you may know may be experiencing some sort of maybe anger or irritability and it's lasted for 2 weeks or longer, that could absolutely be a warning sign. Anhedonia, some of us may be aware, the inability to feel pleasure is certainly a big warning sign, as well as expressing thoughts of suicide. In addition to that, negative impacts on work or school. So for example, our keiki in classes or even work with the burnout, we may feel that we'll also withdraw or isolate ourselves. Our daily activities may be disrupted, and as well as our relationships may be impacted. These are all warning signs that we need to be aware of. And then generally before that, now we're getting into work, eating and sleeping and our focus. So if we're not eating as regularly, or if we find we're overeating, Dr. G mentioned as well, like a lot of sleep has been disrupted during this pandemic, but also we are isolating. If we find that we are isolating ourselves, if maybe we're not looking forward to those meetings or taking a lot of time away, or we're skipping our breaks. We definitely don't want to do this. Breaks are so important. We may find that we're enjoying our work less or feeling bored or irritated in those meetings. That's perfectly normal sometimes, but if we find the frequency of that, that may be an issue. We may be feeling emotionally exhausted with our recent life stressors as well. Actually, Dr. G, do you have anything you'd like to add to this one?
Um, This one is really specific. I think you're doing a fantastic job. This was just really specific to what you're going to be looking for your own warning signs at work. And just like Janice has been talking about, you're just not enjoying work as much. And I think that these line up pretty well with the self-assessment pieces we talked about earlier. Yes, feeling that like difficulty engaging in your sessions. And then even if you are feeling engaged in your sessions, just feeling really emotionally exhausted. I think that is one of the biggest themes that I've been hearing from people who are, providing that direct service care is I just feel tired all the time, that real languishing experience. You could be having some recent life stressors, overlooking your own personal needs to be able to give back or spend more time providing those services. I had people say, if I take care of myself, that means that I'm going to see less people. And if I see less people, then how do I balance that with how that makes me feel as a provider, that people aren't getting care if I'm taking care of myself? And so always being sure to make sure that you're okay and you're really focusing on yourself and your self-care as being primary, because again, you can't give what you're not but you're not putting into yourself. And then of course, one my friend always jokes about this, like you'll know how I'm doing with what I'm doing. And that's the, just staring off into space, just kind of like floating out because you're needing to take kind of that mental absentia break because you are feeling very overwhelmed. And, I think it's important for us to talk about grief literacy. If you're not experiencing grief at the moment, and grief doesn't have to be the loss of someone, it can absolutely be the loss of something, whether that was your expectation of what the year would look like, what your experience at work would be. I've even had people say, like, I didn't go home. I didn't become a remote worker, and that was difficult for me. Like, people are experiencing this on a lot of different levels. I don't think that we talk about this enough. We know when we look at the research that you know, over half of the people are experiencing an active form of grief, but that the vast majority of us feel like it's a private issue, then we shouldn't talk about it. But then how do we get support? So if this is something that that you're struggling with, please reach out. Please talk to people who are well informed, who are great listeners, who are just really healthy people who can help support you as you move through your healing process. And we will be having a training on grief and grief literacy later on in July, because I do think it's so crucial to be able to learn how to provide support without offering platitudes, or feeling awkward and not knowing what to say, and not really sure, like, how do I provide that support, how do I get that support myself without becoming even more vulnerable to possible hurt. We talk about the warning signs for kind of, mental health, and also specific to like work. But sometimes when we talk about it, it feels very clinical. I know I do it myself. I move into my clinical hat. That's what I put on. But sometimes if you're talking to a friend or you're talking to a family member, they know, they're like, oh, you just became Dr. G. I don't like that. So making sure that you're keeping it very light and very conversational. And so I'm like, this is just how simple that it can sound when you're doing a little bit of a check-in with someone, just asking, like, how are you doing from the day to day? How are you sleeping? Like, how's your mood? Also checking in with yourself and asking, like, how are my relationships? Am I staying connected? Am I withdrawing from people? Because it's kind of easy to do if I really want to do that. Checking in with Keiki and teens and asking, like, how's school? Like, how are you getting your work done? What are you looking forward to? Or do you feel hopeful? Because again, we want to make sure that they're future oriented enough that we know that they're motivated and they have that hope in whatever it's going to be as it moves forward. I know that some people have said, like, when is it going to end? When are we going to be in a different place? When's it going to go back to what it was? And I think it's just really important to remember, like, no one really has that concrete answer, but we do know that things are consistently changing and transitioning, and we just adapt to what those changes are. And we just keep moving forward because we know it's going to keep changing. That's the one consistency of life: change. The thing to also be really mindful of is provider burnout, which is really why we come today to talk about this, to look at how providing care means that sometimes you become impacted. And there's really specific things that you're looking for. We've talked about that self assessment, we've talked about what it can be that impacts you. But the other thing to remember is, yes, absolutely, that emotional exhaustion, even this feeling of depersonalization when you are trying to work with someone, and that depersonalization makes you feel less compassionate or less empathetic. And when we talk about depersonalization, really what that is being kind of outside of yourself. If you are a trauma therapist, if you work with people who experience trauma, there is a certain aspect of it where you do that. You absolutely kind of have to do that to be able to stay in the present, provide that really great care, but also model, like, I know this has been really painful, but we can still keep healing and moving forward. This is a different level where you're outside of yourself and you're really far outside of it, so that you still are having a difficulty feeling compassion and empathy and sitting in that story. And you might feel like kind of numb when you're listening to it, and trying to feel that pull of, like, what would that feel if I were in those shoes, or what would I, want in terms of like support for it. And just might find a difficult time figuring that out. You also might just be doing all those things, seeing the people, being compassionate, doing your own self care, and just still not feeling like it's enough or feeling like it is fulfilling to you. And that is also part of provider burnout, is checking in with your own compassion fatigue and asking whether or not, yes, I can do all those things, I'm functioning at that level, but it doesn't feel good. And that's something that you really have to look at. We know for those who do work, and let's be honest, I remember when I went to graduate school, I said, I'm not going to do trauma work. I'm just going to kind of stay in this lane. And what I realized is that lane is always connected to people's stories, and their stories, unfortunately, often do have trauma. And so I started to specialize in it because I thought, like, so many people are going through this, and you don't know who's going to walk in the door, and you don't know what story they're going to share with you. And you also don't know whether you're going to be okay to hear it. Right? Am I in that space? Have I done my self-care and slept well? Am I going through my own stuff? And so that's going to be impacted by what they're telling me. And when that happens, when you're just not able to create those really like strong boundaries and your stuff gets pulled into it, you are susceptible to this vicarious traumatization, which means that what you tell me becomes part of what I experience. And also, I feel traumatized by it. So, making sure that you're being careful about your own experience. If you're starting to have intrusive thoughts and they're connected to something a client told you, that's a big red flag. If you're starting to avoid having that physiological arousal, so those are those symptoms of anxiety that we talked about earlier, those somatic symptoms within you. If you're starting to have those things like those startle responses, just the kind of classic presentation of anxiety and traumatic response, then absolutely please reach out and please start to get support around that. If you're starting to like show distressing behaviors, having a hard time regulating your mood, having a hard time staying connected with people, or if you're also exhibiting or experiencing like addictive compulsive behavior, those are all signs of vicarious trauma. And it's just a moment to like put yourself on pause and say, I think I need support. I think I need to go talk to someone, because it's very easy to have this happen if you're already in a place of stress, if you're already going through what your clients are going through, and you're having to manage this kind of really intense schedule and really intense experience.
And so, addressing Zoom fatigue, I think all of us might be feeling this at this point. So, some of the ways that we can help relieve some of that fatigue would be to use the biggest screen available. And by screen, the literal computer screen. When we have smaller screens, we tend to strain our eyes or squint. We also want to declutter our space. I am a big believer in this one. When I walk into a room and it's just full of stuff, I can feel just how cluttered it is, and it doesn't help me to feel better. So we really want to keep everything tidy just to have that great well-being. In addition to that, we can decrease the lighting to also decrease our eye fatigue. I personally also have blue lens filter glasses. You can find them pretty affordable online if you're interested in those. As well, we want a comfy chair. I know during the beginning of online sessions, I was using this wooden dining chair, and after a few hours on Zoom, it was just so exhausting and painful. And so I stuck a pillow for a while. That didn't work very well. So then I decided to invest in myself and get a proper office chair, and it's made a huge difference. But also, we want to move when we can. We don't want to sit for long periods of time. Of course, that's not great for our health. So when we can, take those opportunities to get up and move away from the screen and from our computers. As well, we want to change our view filters. We can schedule breaks in between Zoom meetings as well. I recently heard, and I need to look into this a bit more, but leaving Zoom maybe 5 minutes before your next one instead of those back-to-back meetings can really make a big difference. And then lastly, we want to use in-session signs for more privacy. And so this Likert scale is a really great tool. After everything that we've gone over today, this is how we can sort of use as an assessment of where we might be. And so you can see here on the screen, the 0 to 40 is when we want to, like Dr. G said, put some investment into our bank account. We want to practice little self-care techniques. And this is when we're maybe not feeling many symptoms of anxiety. We may be feeling okay. So this is the perfect time to have a healthy diet, get those nourishing foods, exercise when we can, and practice those self-care skills. And then when we move into the 40 to 60 range, this is when we do start feeling those symptoms of anxiety. And so this is where we'd really want to use those coping skills. And again, if you would like to see more coping skills, we will have other sessions on those. But also Dr. G will be going in briefly with that as well in later slides. And then we also have the 60 to 100. This is when we're really struggling and we really can feel those even physiological symptoms of anxiety. And this is where we want to apply the stress tolerance skills, which Dr. G will be getting into.
Thank you. I'm just going to peek in the chat. So some of the coping skills that I like to talk about, and I think that this is helpful. One of the things that I have had people talk to me about is what are things that I can use, but also really simple things that I can also teach my clients. I want to make sure like I'm doing them, they can do them. And we don't want to add too many things on a plate. I think that sometimes, I come up with these great ideas and then they're like, I don't have an hour to learn that. And so I've been really trying to be more careful about like 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes and I will practice one of mine and you can practice one of yours. And so one of those first skills that you can talk about is just basic mindfulness, staying really present, focused. And I think that when we talk about reentry anxiety, mindfulness and being present focused is so important instead of, kind of worrying about where we've been or worried about like what could possibly happen and catastrophizing, just staying right in the moment and saying, I'm going to work on this thing that I'm doing, how I feel about that, and then managing the stress around that. Meditation is a form of mindfulness that can look very different for different people. It can come from, kind of more of a relaxation background or come from really kind of a faith system background, depending upon how you choose to use it. And meditation can look very different. It could be anything from a walking meditation, so you're still active but grounding in your senses, to really just laying down and doing those deep breathing exercises and fully immersing in a meditation. Deep breathing is a fantastic skill to practice for yourself, but also to teach your clients. It's something that they can use everywhere. And I think that's the concern I hear is, I don't always want to pull something out of my bag or do something that's really noticeable. And deep breathing is just one of those that they can do it walking to a car, sitting at a red light, in a doctor's office, anywhere really. And if they just do it for those 5 minutes, they can get that really great return. I worked with people who did have a background in, complex trauma. They were healing from that, and most of them did have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of the big things that we taught them was when your nervous system gets activated, and it will absolutely get activated in that 60 to 100 range. And that's why we talk about that range, because more and more of us are moving into that range more frequently than before. But when you move into that 60 to 100 range, your nervous system's getting activated. There are some really simple things that you can do that can actually like short circuit that nervous system a little bit. I call them the trap doors. So one of the things that you can do is progressive muscle relaxation. You can find free kind of scripts on this. You can go to YouTube, or even if you want to pay for one at the Apple store, they have the progressive muscle relaxation recordings. And what it does is it just teaches you to like hyperextend. So if you all want to make a fist, and be really careful not to, if you have fingernails, to make those little half moons, but make a really tight fist and you're just going to hold it as I talk. What progressive muscle relaxation does is it has you hyperextend the muscle so that when you release it, it hyper releases it past that point. The reason that that's important is your brain adapts very quickly to information, including muscle tension. So when I count down from 3, you're going to feel at that 1, just like a quick of the muscle. Are you ready? 3, 2, and 1. It's very quick, like, and that's just your muscle releasing past the point it was before you started that exercise. And progressive muscle relaxation will have you do each pairing of muscles, your arms, your legs, your stomach, and have you go from the crown of your head to the tips of your toes. So by the time you get to the end, it often pairs with deep breathing. By the time you get to the end of that script, you're very relaxed. However, this is a longer script, so it's not going to be 5 minutes. It's probably going to be more like 35 minutes. But once you learn it, you can isolate it to the muscle group that feels the most tense and just practice that exercise there. That's why this one can turn into a 5-minute exercise if needed. Of course, doing just basic relaxation. Janice mentioned some different things like there we have aromatherapy also listed. You can do stretching, any kind of thing that brings you a sense of relaxation, swimming, which we'll talk about in just a minute. The other turn of the coin, which I think progressive muscle relaxation, I think the body calms the brain. Autogenic training actually is the opposite route. So it will go from the brain to calm the body. A lot of people are not as familiar with autogenic training. And I talked to you a little bit about the nervous system because A, I like research and science, but B, because it's really important to understand how your body responds, because then you can explain it to your clients and say, when you get to that 60 to 100, your nervous system's activated. Why is that important for them to know? Because certain things are going to be highly more effective in that 60 to 100 that if they tried, let's say, for example, I like listening to music and that's my 0 to 40. But if I'm at 70 and I'm listening to music, it doesn't change how I feel. And that's when you're going to get the feedback of this doesn't work. The self care isn't effective. And they're actually accurate because they're telling you my nervous system's too high, it's activated, and these 0 to 40, 40 to 60 things aren't as effective. I need something really specific. And these are things that you can absolutely use in the 60 to 100 if you want to. But I'm going to teach you tried and true distress tolerance skills in that 60 to 100 in just a minute. But autogenic training does is it helps you do a little bit of like self-hypnosis. So instead of tightening and releasing muscles, you're going to use kind of that self-hypnosis script. So take a deep breath and hold it and slowly release it. And then just repeat after me. My left arm is heavy and warm. Say to yourself, my left arm is heavy and warm. Last time. My left arm is heavy and warm. Taking in a deep breath, holding it for a few seconds. Now slowly releasing that back out and saying to yourself, my right arm is heavy and warm. Again, my right arm is heavy and warm. Last time, my right arm is heavy and warm. Perfect. That is one line of, again, about a 35-minute script. And the only way to make your left arm or right arm heavy and warm is to kind of move the blood distribution out of the torso, which is where it collects when our nervous system activates, back out into the limbs. Autogenic training is not effective for everyone. So I always say, try progressive muscle relaxation, try autogenic training and see which one fits for you. For some people, it's both. For some people, it's neither. And for some, it's typically the majority of people, it's one or the other. So I do recommend trying those because they are very effective, especially for people who are healing through complex trauma. The other thing that you can use is just basic grounding, just looking around and making sure that your senses are engaged. That's why we recommend aromatherapy. I always say if you're not familiar with aromatherapy, but you do want to learn to use it, please find someone who is well educated and well versed, a professional, because there are some essential oils that are not appropriate to diffuse, that are not appropriate to ingest, and they're not healthy for pets or children when diffused. So depending upon things like allergies, age, and how you're using it, they can go from being helpful and healing to be like unhealthy. So make sure that you do work with someone who knows a little bit about this and is knowledgeable about the use of essential oils. Oop. So when I talk to people and we talk about that 60 to 100 range, when we talk about this is how I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I often want to talk about distress tolerance skills. And if you're familiar with dialectical behavioral therapy, which I know some of you will be, you'll recognize that these are Marsha Linehan's go-to skills for people who are doing kind of like crisis management. I think they are fantastic. If I teach people one skill at all to take away from all this time, it's going to be the dive response. So yes, if you are in the 60 to 100 range, if your client is saying self-care does not seem to be effective, you can say these are things that you can do. If you are one of those people who gets a lot of energy when you feel stressed, burn it off, do that really intense exercise, then try that diaphragmatic breathing. And you'll see me kind of interchangeably use different phrases. So far, I've said deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, and now you're saying paced breathing. And the reality is they're all very, very similar. Pace typically has like a pattern within it, but they do the same function. And so I don't want people to be turned off if they find paced and they were looking for deep breathing. Interchangeable in a lot of ways. The dive response. This one is fantastic. Absolutely like the highlight of the thing that I have learned thus far in my career. There is a gland on the side of your nose that when it's activated and it gets cold and wet, that's how we activate it, that it will slow down your blood pressure and your heart rate. Why does it do that? It's built into all mammals who walk on the land so that when they go into the water, they don't take an involuntary breath and drown. That little gland will activate whether you're swimming in the water, whether you're putting your face in a cold bowl of water and holding your breath for 10 seconds, or whether you are holding your breath with a wet rag placed exactly over that same location. So you can see why that would be helpful because I don't have to constantly go swimming to activate the thing that can calm immediately my blood pressure and my heart rate. And when those two things calm down, my brain goes, oh, we must be relaxing. It is a trapdoor and a short circuit to your nervous system, and I highly recommend it. I've had many people have a lot of success with that intervention. The good thing about that cold water remedy is that it does address temperature. When we get upset, our faces get flushed, our temperature goes up. So a really easy way to bring that temperature down is adjusting air conditioning, using a wet rag, using, safely like an ice pack that's wrapped so it doesn't harm the skin. Anything we can do to kind of bring that temperature down will also help relax the body. And then of course, paired muscle relaxation is the same as progressive. It's just another phrase, so I wanted you to be aware of that. I think that when we talk about working with our clients, one of the things that comes up quite a bit is the idea of support plans. Now, we all know that, safety plans, they're not the most efficacious when we look at the research. But what I do think is helpful is having this feeling of a support plan, both for yourself and for your clients to say, who do you talk to that you just enjoy talking to? You don't have to talk to them about what's happening. They're just fun to talk to. And so it's a good distraction. It's not, active avoidance in an unhealthy way. It's a distraction and building in positive emotion. And then who you're going to talk to who's a great listener, but you can bounce off and talk to about what is actually happening. Making sure that you have those providers' numbers saved in your phones. If you have teens, like I used to work with them all the time, and I'd say, okay, make sure you have those phone numbers, and they would just stick it in the phone in the phone case. And so the next time I saw them, they're like, I have it. It's in my wallet. It's in my pocket. It's in the phone case. And I'd say, like, let's just spend the next couple of minutes to saving it into your phone. I know you might not need it, but if you ever do, I don't want you looking for it. It's going to be right there. Making sure any kind of provider numbers are listed in there, and that would be primary care providers, social workers, case managers, whoever you need to have in your phone, whoever your clients need to have in the phone, making sure they're saved. We're going to be sending you a crisis resource sheet so they can save those numbers as well as they need. And then, of course, our self-care fast five. This is kind of like one of my personal ones where I say, know what your self-care items are that are available to you at any given time. So if you're in the car, at home, at work, what are you going to reach for? What are you going to do that helps soothe you? And the fast five, typically you're not going to have the five with you at any given moment, but let's say I'm at work, then I can have like relaxing music. I have aromatherapy here. I have some like squeeze balls if I need them. I have a couple of those items I don't have to locate or go somewhere to get. They're just accessible to me. I know that they're, with me at all times and they're in different locations. Know what yours are. Know that you have them in whatever different like reiterations you need for home, work, car. So when you're stressed, you can just do that. And then, of course, knowing what gives your life meaning, it can change. That's okay. It can change from minute to minute, from day to day, as long as you know what it is, because that's hope building. That's what keeps moving us forward. Something that I was really interested in when I was doing direct service care, I was doing inpatient psychiatric care. That can be really intense. I also had done outpatient care for many years. And what I was looking at is what internationally has been quite effective for people who are trying to create healing spaces for the provider, healing spaces for the client. And this actually comes out of a tradition that is Danish. It's Hygge. And how this works is you think about comfort. Like when you really think about a space, think of what makes you feel really comfy, cozy. That's the feeling you're going to get. So it's going to be using for yourself, maybe at home, an area that has soft blankets and pillows. Maybe you set up for yourself at at work, like a little tea station. We have one here. Um, Bringing in greenery. You can't see it, but I have lots of plants in my office. I'm blessed with a window and I use it to its full extent. But I also have a couple of fake ones that are further away from the window because they look fantastic and people don't know that they're not real most of the time. But making sure that you kind of have that in your space, that sense of pulling nature in, you're really focusing on indulgence instead of extravagance. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It shouldn't cost really hardly any money if you're trying to do this for yourself and create that space, because we want your clients to be able to replicate it to some degree. You could have soft music and books, and think of like those low lights again that we were talking about. We have overhead lighting. I brought in lamps and just keep them turned off because it's more relaxing. And then making sure that you're comfortable, professional but comfortable. You can use aromatherapy. I sometimes have candles. I just don't burn them. They come, very strongly scented. I just take the top off and leave them. It just, is very soft as it goes through the room without having to burn it. And then simplify your color scheme. When we work with people who have, let's say, for example, if someone has a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, what we do is we want to streamline the visual intake of information to make it simpler. I want you to be able to feel less stressed. We do that with other people as well, who typically their nervous system is really easy to activate. By simplifying a color scheme, you kind of cut down on that visual clutter, cut down on that emotional clutter. If I can't control it here, the parts that I can control it, I'm going to do as much as I can. And really, those simple color schemes, you can go from like neutrals. You see a lot of those creams and beiges. At my workplace, I do black and cream, and I keep everything very simple because I think when we're already inundated with so much input from the stories we're hearing, the feelings people are feeling, our own responses to that, it can be very easy to be overactivated in a way that is not easy to soothe. And so this is just a simple way of doing that as much as possible. Declutter, pare down, make it simple. We're going to send you a crisis resource sheet. And so you're going to have those numbers to share. But there's some of the numbers you're going to see is that National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Hawaii Cares number that used to be the crisis line. You're going to see numbers like this in your PDF, which is the Child Abuse Reporting Hotline and Trafficking Line, our DFAC Center, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. We know we're trying to keep more eyes on these vulnerable populations. The other thing that you can look at as well, and I recommend these, I don't recommend things I don't personally use. These were made, these two apps, they are free and they are available on iTunes and for your Android. COVID Coach is going to help you to kind of manage your stress, track your mood, and they do have some of those relaxation exercises that you can just turn on and use, whereas CBTI is going to help you track your sleep, give you like good sleep recommendations. I used that one and was like, I mean, my sleep's not terrible. And then I tracked it and was like, yes, it is. And so then it gave me some really fantastic tips on what I could do better, just slight adjustments so I don't feel overwhelmed by them. So I do highly recommend these, both for providers and for clients if you're looking for anything. They are created by the National Center for PTSD and then the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. So they are very backed by research. If you're looking for any things that we talked about today, including like the crisis resource sheet, we have coloring sheets on grounding for kids. You'll get a worksheet for diaphragmatic breathing, because we did talk about that a little bit, that will be in your email. But if you're looking for any of those that you want to share or learn a little bit more about, go to our website, mentalhealthhawaii.org, click on this Get Connected banner, and you're going to find all of our upcoming events, all of our upcoming trainings, and all of our free downloadables, including some, helpful like graphics on compassion fatigue that you can share out if you're interested. And there again, there's our website. We are in office, so please feel free Monday through Friday to call us. We do have our Maui office. It's our Oahu office number. But our big thing is we want to make sure that people know that there are resources available. And though we're not direct resource providers, we do connect people. So if they make a phone call and they're like, they didn't answer, that wasn't what I was looking for, they actually can just call us and we'll help guide them through that process. I know that that was a lot of information. So what I want to do is open it up because we do have a few minutes so that people can drop any questions that they might have into the chat. I see a comment where someone's saying, I do none of this. I play video games till 3 and sleep for 5 hours and troll people on Stolen Stuff Hawaii. I probably see you there. The reality is self-care is so different for many different people, and that is fine. That's great. I am one of those people where I don't feel like I've gotten good self-care if I just kind of like lounge and nap. I love a good nap, but I still feel like I want to go out in nature. I want to do some things. I typically am a little bit of like a flipperty chip at a busybody, and that's self-care to me. And the people around me go, that doesn't look relaxing. So just know that that is totally fine. And people find self-care in a lot of different ways. And honestly, laughter is an amazing one. So I'm still giggling because I'm thinking like, yeah, I probably saw some comments on there. There's some good times to be had on there. Thank you so much, Christine. Yeah, absolutely. It's so important for us to talk about how much our direct service providers are giving to our community and how fantastic they are, but also making sure they're getting the support that they need because it is so hard to fill your cup, but then constantly also be expected to pour out for other people. And we are so grateful for what they have done in supporting our community. I don't see any other questions coming in. Just know that you're going to get a PDF of the slides. This is available on our Facebook page, Mental Health America of Hawaii, and we will be getting a link to this training specific that is going to be on our YouTube page. There will not be any chat. It's hidden from our recording. So you'll be able to share it out or just review any portion that you thought like, oh, I was kind of like not paying as much attention as I wanted to be at that moment. So you can always go back and watch it. Absolutely. But yeah, a lot of these tips actually, Brianna, are highly effective, even if you're not a provider. That Huga recommendation I gave for spaces, I built an entire, with my, of course, with my wonderful coworkers, an entire clinic around that for people who had a diagnosis of PTSD. And then I went home and did it for myself as well. It is so relaxing to have just like a simplified place, but I also have kind of like another area that's just my like, what I like to call my clutter bug area. It's not all pristine. That's realistic, right? Especially if you have kids. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really, honest to say, all of us are feeling very stretched and thin. I highly recommend the dive response. But if you enjoy the ocean, absolutely find time to go back and go into the ocean if you can, if you're one of those people who just love going into it, because when you swim, that is intense exercise. You're forced to pace your breathing. You're getting that releases some of that muscle tension and you're activating your dive response. It is the perfect exercise to fit into almost every stress tolerance level of intervention that you're looking for. So when people say, I love the ocean, it's so healing, I'm like, yes, for many reasons, right? There's even a biological one. If at any point a question comes up that didn't happen today, because I do sometimes think about things later, then I'm like, oh, I wonder, feel free to drop that into an email to us. I'm going to put my email into the chat. And that way, if anything comes up for you later, feel free to email me if you have any questions. We're always available. Thank you so much for coming today. I know that when all of us learn and grow, it increases mental health literacy, it increases our community resiliency, and that's what we need so much right now. So just and I know it's a lot to ask because we're all feeling really fatigued, but by coming today, you really provide so much support for yourself and for our community. So again, thank you for joining us. Janice, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I just want to say thank you as well and demonstrate my blue light filter glasses in case any of you are curious.
I love them. Awesome. All right, everyone, have a fantastic week. Also, a fantastic long weekend. Maybe hopefully you'll find some time to do some of those self-care pieces, but in all things, just find your joy and then share it. Thank you for coming.